here with the man himself, Nakasuchi, Ronnie,
Matt Powell,
the man.
Incredible. That guy is a total mental illness patient. You made him look like a moron in that film.
The thing about the movie is, it's, you know, you could have been honest. Like you didn't have to. I mean, you have to know that those edits were disingenuous.
I'm not saying I don't personally think that anything was misedited at all.
Let me unmute. All right, welcome back, you heathens and demons, you sinners and saints. I see CJ is in the side chat, which is perfect, because CJ, in our debate last night, you quoted Dr. Josh as saying a thing that I said I didn't believe you. And I even said that if Dr. Josh did, I would disagree with Dr. Josh. So I did not look that up. So I need you, CJ, to tell me what that was in the side chat. So please do that. But Dr. Josh is here. John could not make it tonight. John is sleeping. He's being that boomer John. And he won't even be here for the next stream, which is going to be an important stream. Come back and check it out. But tonight, this is going to be fun. I always love having Dr. Josh on. I feel like Dr. Josh is pretty much like 85% responsible for my knowledge on biblical slavery. So,
well, I'm very sorry, because there's so many other people that should be teaching you about it.
Well, you know, I've been blessed, and I've had access to you on this topic as well as a couple others, and it has definitely helped in my debate performances. Although I do feel like me losing my cool the way I did a couple times in that debate last night wasn't cool. And I think, it was definitely, I have a lot of stuff going on. The audience knows about it. I'm not going to talk about it. But I think that did come out a little bit in the debate last night. Because usually in my debates, I tend to keep my cool. In fact, people often comment I'm not really rage when I debate. So outside of that, I thought it went fairly well. And, instead of like trying to review it, because we would never get through even a portion of it or even get to the important parts that we would want to talk about, me and Dr. Josh just figured, Dr. Josh has a couple things that he wanted to talk about, and that there was a couple things that I could bring up, and we'll just kind of have that conversation and go from there. And I think that it'll be kind of more productive than trying to, pick a spot in the debate and hoping we kind of land on where we want to land on. So what's up, Dr. Josh? Thanks for coming back. Always good to have you on the channel.
Oh man, I appreciate it. It's always an honor to come on. So
yeah, I always feel the same. I often tell the story because when I first met Dr. Josh, I thought I was too I thought I was a bit rough around the edges for Dr. Josh. And then I heard him say fuck for the first time, and I'm like, Dr. Josh said fuck. But yeah, it's been a fun ride, and you've been one of the people that is like consistently stayed there close for me, offered your friendship, and I've always been kind of grateful for it. And then to have you to come in and kind of tell me, where I go wrong in some of these debates or help me with my argumentation. I just feel like it's the ultimate blessing, to use a Christian terminology.
I appreciate that. Yeah, I didn't get to watch. I got to watch sort of snippets of it last night. We had some interesting things happen with our 3-year-old, but so I got to watch parts of it. I think enough to intrigue me to say, figure out what it is, for example, that I said in that modern day debate. I actually really am curious about what that quote was. But yeah, like I got to listen to the beginning, the opening statements, and then the discussion about Leviticus 25 and the Jubilee, and then it was kind of hit or miss after that, but.
Yeah, well, CJ, in the side chat, this was definitely about, like, the option of slavery, how it was like pretty much the only choice for Israel to make at the time. That was what it was about. I just can't remember specifically what it was that you said. But yeah, that's the first thing I would really like to talk about, though, Dr. Josh, is this every 50-year jubilee that CJ was mentioning, and CJ insisted that meant everybody. Now, I try to tell him, you're like the only person I've ever really seen really say that. Most people, even Christian scholars, will recognize that there were two forms of slavery, and chattel slavery was lifetime. I try to read the inheritance passages. He still somehow thinks that, it applied to all people. But even here in the South, when we had slavery here in the South, we had a constitution that said, all humans are created equal, yet we still had slavery. So it's like CJ can't almost, equate that in his mind that it could be talking about free people in this passage and not quite talking about the slaves at the same time. But I would like to get your thoughts on it. You're definitely more of an expert than I am or CJ. So I would definitely like to hear what maybe I was wrong and maybe CJ was right.
So, I mean, first of all, as I'm sure everybody watching knows, and I know that Knock, there are people that specialize, that spend their entire academic careers doing this, legal aspects, for example. Actually, I have a stack of books sitting next to me, not a big stack. I wanted to keep it, but just some brief recommendations. The late Raymond Westbrook and Bruce Wells, who is down at University of Texas, Austin, who should be coming on our channel sometime this year.
Well, that would be awesome.
But he wrote an article in the most recent Society of Biblical Literature volume on, damn it, I can't remember. I think it's on the Decalogue. Anyway, I can't remember. But he wrote, so this book is Everyday Law and Biblical Studies. I held it up for a reason. Or in Biblical Israel, and essentially it's a short little book, 150 pages maybe, but it covers all of the essential basics of biblical law, and it does so in a way that utilizes the ancient Near Eastern legal sections, and makes the appropriate comparisons. But it's written for a popular audience, so there's a section in here on property and inheritance, for example, chapter 5, contracts in chapter 6. But status and family, it talks about slavery. So there's a section on that. Nonetheless, it's a really good introduction. I recommend that everybody get it because I don't think it's that expensive. And they're two brilliant ancient Near Eastern legal scholars. That's what they do. So I have this book. I mean, I don't know if this is worth anything, but I think I'd throw that one in there.
I think that might be the best one. I'm just saying.
Yeah, it's definitely not. It's definitely not. This is a book that everybody should get. I'm sorry to take up.
Take your time.
Minutes. Martha Roth. If you want to read we talk all the time about, this, the laws of Hammurabi say this, or the laws of Ur-Nammu say this, or Lipit Ishtar, or whatever, the Hittite laws. She produces all of them in translation here. This is the place to get it. Martha Roth is at University of Chicago, brilliant Assyriologist. It's an absolute necessity if you're going to do anything with ancient Near Eastern or biblical legal texts. Two more, just real quick. I'm sorry.
Oh no, take your time. This is I need books.
Samuel Gringus has Laws in the Bible and Early Rabbinic Collections that the name seems is a little misleading. Essentially what he's doing is he's pulling together bringing all the ancient Near Eastern legal sources, the biblical legal sources, and then later rabbinic traditions, and sort of tying them all together to show how the tradition, ran coming into the Second Temple period and beyond. So excellent volume. And then very recently published, I think it's actually 2020. Let me just, because I don't want to misquote. It's recent anyway. Come on, Josh. Where is it? 2019. This is a little more pricey. Can I get it? There it is. The Oxford Handbook on Biblical Law, Pamela Barmash. But this is, it's a meaty volume, but it goes through, it has a section on everything. I don't agree, obviously, with everything that each of the writers say, but it's got a very good mix of scholars. And it's just, the bibliography, it's worth it for the bibliography alone, because it's an updated bibliography. It's 2019. So anyway, I'm going to stop.
I always wondered, and before you get into the Jubilee thing, like I always wondered, because like textbooks in college always cost like just exorbitant, just crazy amounts of money, and often good history books do as well. And I always found it like odd that like the important books people should be reading are almost unaffordable. Like I'm wondering, like, is that because a lot of people aren't going to be reading this, and this is a way that's a way to kind of compensate these scholars for doing all of this work that they're putting into it?
So it's not really to compensate the scholars, because the scholars generally don't see the money from it. So what ends up happening, as I understand it, I've never gone through that process myself because we self-publish. But like Sam Gringus, when he published this book, it wasn't so much so that he could get paid for it. It was so that he could put that on his academic resume, his curriculum vitae. So, and obviously to get that information out there. But so these publishing houses, they're, as you say, it's probably has a lot to do with supply and demand is not, terribly high. And so, but there are people that will absolutely buy them. And so I think to make it worth their while, they bring the prices up. But,
so kind of cover cost. I do know the publishing world a little bit. I tried, and it's a hard world to get into. It's much easier to self-publish, especially nowadays with all the different options you have and the quality you can get from that. But like, the publishing house world, even on the fiction side, was brutal.
I imagine.
So I can imagine, because publishers are always trying to cover their cost, and that's one thing. Like I used to give advice to up and coming writers, trying to make it, and I'm like, never take that first contract. Always talk to an agent, and the publishing house gonna get their money back. So always remember that. But like the Jubilee thing, the 50 year, because I kept thinking, like CJ was saying 15 years, and that kind of wasn't computing with me at first, like every 15 years. But every 50 years he was talking about. And he did kind of catch me, like, because at the beginning of the chapter, I know, like, at the beginning of the chapter, when it starts talking about the slavery laws, it starts with, the bond servants, and then it works its way to the chattel slavery. He caught me with the very beginning of the chapter, and I was just assuming, all right, we're there where it's talking about bond servants, when indeed it was actually just talking about this Jubilee. So, like, as a historian and what you know about history, did this Jubilee free the chattel slavery side of it as well as the bond servant side?
No. So let's take a step back, and it might be good to read at least the first 11 verses or so of Leviticus 25, and if you could get it in the NIV. Just so that people understand it.
Yeah, I read the KJV because every time I don't, Christians criticize me for it. But the New International Version, it's so much better and easier.
so feel you have my blessing if you need it to read the NIV. It's a great translation. I know people always give me a hard time about that. Nobody in the academic world gives me a hard time about it. But
I do happen to deal with a lot of NIFBs that are King James only, so a lot of that criticism comes from them. Oh, you're not using King James. I don't have to listen to you, so I always end up going back there. All right, so the New International Version, Leviticus 25 is the Lord said to Moses at Mount Sinai, "Speak to the Israelites and say to them, when you enter the land."
Okay, so just stop right there for a second. Yeah. So. Again, we're going with the narrative, right? For this part of the discussion, we're going with the narrative. So if we're trying to explain what's going on as far as the writers are concerned, what is it that they're trying to get their reader to think is happening? There at Mount Sinai, God is speaking, and he's speaking to Moses. And Moses is told, say to the children of Israel. So that's really important just right off the bat to get the context of what's going on. God is speaking to Moses, who is supposed to give these laws to the Israelites. Okay, go ahead.
All right, so when you enter the land I'm going to give you, the land itself must observe a Sabbath to the Lord. For 6 years sow your fields, and for 6 years prune your vineyards and gather their crops. But in the 7th year the land is to have a year of Sabbath rest, a Sabbath to the Lord. Do not sow your fields or prune your vineyards. Do not reap what grows of itself or harvest the grapes of your untended vines. The land is to have a year of rest. Whatever the land yields during the Sabbath year will be food for you, for yourself, your male and female servants, and the hired worker and temporary resident who live among you, as well as for your livestock and the wild animals in your land. Whatever the land produces may be eaten. Count off 7 Sabbath years, 7 times 7
So if
years.
we just pause for a second,
right,
just so we can, just so that the whole thing, we can follow it along. So this is those first verses are talking about the Sabbath rest. Now, if I don't mean to sound silly here, but it's good to make sure we all stay on the same page. When it says you are to allow who is the you? You are to do this, and you are to do that. If God is speaking to Moses, and Moses is supposed to say to the children of Israel, quote, you do this. Who is the you?
The free Israelites, the Israel.
That's right.
Yeah.
Israel. It's not the nations. It's not anybody else. It's not us. Right? It's Israel. That's what the passage is to. So what's supposed to happen here is just as the weekly Sabbath was, working 6 days and then there's a day off where you don't do anything. The land is supposed to get its own Sabbath. So for 6 years, they're supposed to till the ground and grow things and use the land. Mm-hmm. But on the 7th year, they're supposed to just stop, right? They don't till the land. The land just kind of, and you see this in Exodus 23, I think is the parallel passage. It's not strictly parallel, but the same sort of thing. You have this 7th year rest. Mm-hmm. So every 7 years, the land gets a rest. Now, to just quickly give bigger picture here, if you read through Jeremiah 25, you read through the end of 2nd Chronicles, Israel was supposed to do this every 7th year, right? So every 7th year, supposed to let the land lie fallow. This actually comes up again in Leviticus 26. But the point is that they were in the land for, the text would have you understand that they're in the land for roughly 500 years, right? 400 to 500 years. What the text is doing, what the narrative wants you to understand is that if they're in the land for 490 years, if you divide 490 by 7, every 7th year, they're supposed to let the land lie fallow. So there should be 1 Sabbath year every 7 years. Mm-hmm. If you divide 490 by 7, you get 70. All right. When Jeremiah talks about Israel's going to be booted off the land so that the land can enjoy her Sabbath rests, Israel gets booted off the land for 70 years.
Wow.
Because they didn't ever do those Sabbath rests, right? That's what the narrative's trying to get at. So the point is that it's a long part of the narrative, right? Mm-hmm. This is laying all the groundwork for it, and later writers, are tying these things together. It's early interpretation of the text, but that's sort of what's supposed to happen here. So every 7th year, land's supposed to lie fallow. Okay.
And they didn't for such a time. As a Native American, former Native American spiritualist, but as somebody that practiced that religion and know their customs, they had this 2/3 rule. Like, you always gave the land its opportunity to heal itself. So, like, in itself, like, it seems like a bad economic policy to every 7 years you're going to shut down your economy. But at the same time, every 7 years you're also giving that land precious time to kind of heal itself. And if you do that, as the natives were able to show, your crops will be abundant. That land will rebound and produce a better crop. Interesting. So like, did that happen in history? I guess I'm kind of intrigued by that. Like, for 70 years, that never really happened, right?
This is if we're stepping now out of the narrative. This is a very late text. This is
Yeah.
part of what's called the Holiness Code. So this is written very late,
Right.
maybe Persian period. I mean, but it's written. It's not written like in 1400 or something BCE or 1200. It's written much later. Looking back.
All right. So,
but go ahead. Sorry.
well, I think I was at verse 8, I believe. So I'll just start there. Count off 7 Sabbath years, 7 times, or did I already read that? So that the 7.
No, that's where I cut you off. Yeah.
All right. So count off 7 Sabbath years, 7 times 7 years, so that the 7 Sabbath years amount to a period of 49 years. Then have the trumpet sounded everywhere on the 10th day of the 7th month. On the day of atonement, sound the trumpet throughout your land. Consecrate the 50th year and proclaim liberty throughout the land to all its inhabitants. It shall be a jubilee for you. Each of you is to return to your family property and to your own clan. I mean, it sounds like once I get here with my Bible is Stupid series, I'm going to have a lot of fun with that. But go ahead.
But I mean, so let's pay real close attention to what it's saying. Just if you read that last verse, was it verse 10 that you just read? Read that for me one more time.
Consecrate the 50th year and proclaim liberty throughout the land to all its inhabitants. It shall be a jubilee for you. Each of you is to return to your family property and to your own clan.
Who is the you?
That would be Israel, the Israelites.
And to confirm that, in case there's any question about that, who owns land in Israel?
Israelites.
Do foreigners own land in Israel?
Not as far as I know. Yeah, no.
No, they don't, right? This chapter talks about tenant farmers. If you go down to verse 47 and following, you'll see that foreigners, they can become these tenant farmers, and they can, by renting the land for a period of time from the Israelites, they can, amass wealth. But no foreigner owns land. That's the whole point.
Yeah.
So I get that the phrase throughout the land to all its inhabitants, would lead someone to conclude, okay, well, this must be everybody. But the inhabitants are the Israelites.
Yep.
Right. And this isn't something that we guess at. First of all, before I came on here, I just went back to my shelf and pulled 7 books on the topic off the shelf and thought, let me just see if anybody disagrees with this. No, it's not even that it's consensus. It's like,
yeah,
of course that's what this means. So, but it's critical to understand because it's really the key to the passage. This whole aspect of the Israelites have been given this land. The 12 tribes of Israel have been given this land. And as we're going to see, I mean, we won't read through the whole chapter because it would take a while, but I think that's enough what we've read there for this part of the discussion anyway. What's going on here is the same thing to an even greater degree, I think, than what you see in places like Deuteronomy 15 or in the book of Deuteronomy as a whole. God has this special covenant with Israel, and they are the ones that have the land. They're the ones that are given the land. Now, they are God's slaves. They're God's servants in the land, but they are the ones that are the resident aliens on God's land, right? But so they're the ones that have temporary holdings in it as far as God is concerned, right? It's because it's God's land, and so they're temporarily holding it.
Mm-hmm.
But, practically speaking, they're the ones that hold property. And so the tribe and the individual clans and then individual families and so forth have their own, portions of property allotted to them. And so the key here is twofold. One, and really this is the big one, God is looking out for, according to the narrative, God is looking out for his people. So what he doesn't want to see is land and wealth amassing amongst the few. It seemed, I'm not an economist, but it seems very anti-capitalistic, right?
Yeah.
In the sense that he doesn't want this to happen for too long. So every 50th year, he's saying, whoop, everybody, all Israelites go back to their land. They go back to their holdings. And you're going to see it later. That the Israelite is going to, if he falls into dire straits or he has to sell his property or he has to sell himself, whatever, however, there are certain stipulations, but ultimately, boom, everybody goes back to their property. It's clean. So it's a reset button.
That's what yesterday, like that was tickling my memory. Because when he brought this 50-year thing up, like it was tickling my memory. Like this is a reset button. That's exactly what came into my brain. But I didn't know it well enough to articulate it and to argue back. And I was like, reset button. What am I even thinking right now? but that did come to my mind because there was that moment. You did have that reset of the Israelite.
I just, so I'm just looking for the section here. This is from, there it is. Ugh, it's always backwards of the camera.
Everyday law.
Okay, so I'm on page 123. Deuteronomy 15, 1-3 decrees a release every 7th year. It recognizes that this will lead creditors to withhold loans and exhorts them to be generous, verses 9 and 10. Leviticus 25 institutes the Jubilee year every 50th year. Land is to be restored to its owners, and all Israelite slaves are to be released. It's the whole point.
Yeah.
Just seeing if there's anything else here that would be worth saying, but yeah, whatever their effect, land and slaves cannot be sold for more than 50 years, and the price of redemption will be calculated by the time remaining to the next Jubilee. Anyway.
Yes.
So
CJ responded real quick, Dr. Josh, throughout all the land and to all inhabitant. And yes, he says, foreigners can absolutely own land in Israel. This exact same chapter, verse 47, talks about wealthy foreigners.
They're not owning land. So CJ, I mean, I get it. It's when you're reading it in the English, maybe it seems that way. They don't own land. They're toshavim. So the toshav, you can read. There's a specific article by Mayshar, Mayshar. I think that's how you spell his last name. But it's called, oh, it's terrible. It's called Who is the Toshav? I think that's the title of it, Who is the Toshav? But these are tenant farmers. So how to explain it? So actually, it's not that complicated. So let's say you're an Israelite, knock, and you own these 3 parcels of land. I'm a foreigner. I come in. I'm looking to, I can't own land, again, according to this sort of utopian portrayal here in Leviticus 25. So I can't own land. So what do? Well, I can come to you and say, hey, I'll pay you X amount, whatever it is, be it in silver or be it in crops, probably in crops. Again, we're now leaving my field of expertise here. But I can recommend books if people are interested.
I love books.
But I say to you, I will rent this field from you and I will pay you X amount. And then whatever is the surplus, I keep for myself. So verses 47 to 55, the point, of the passage is that you have a tenant farmer who doesn't fall into debt. He's actually very, very successful. So, he says, I will pay you, I don't know, 10 shekels of silver, let's just say, to rent your piece of property here to farm. And then let's say I go out, let's say it's me, I go out and I grow enough grain to sell and I make 15 shekels of silver or 20 shekels of silver. Well, I pay you your 10. And it's all very straightforward, right? I pay your 10 and now I get to keep the surplus. Well, if I have really good, years growing on this land, I'm amassing wealth to the point that, and this is what the text is talking about, if I become as a tenant farmer, I don't own this land. I mean, this is absolutely critical. I am a tenant farmer. I am a toshav. If I become so wealthy that I'm able to loan money to an Israelite, and that Israelite defaults, and I get his property or I get him as a slave, what do? What's the law calling for? Right? That's the point of
Yep.
versus 47 to 55 or whatever.
Yeah,
If that makes sense.
I sat here and read it, and yeah, it doesn't say in anywhere that they're landowners. And CJ, I had to point out the fact just here, even in the modern day, not all rich people are landowners. I mean, you have a lot of rich people; they just got their little penthouses in New York City, and that little penthouse costs more than I could ever dream of paying for anything, But Israel. It had an economy, right? Like they would have foreigners coming in. There would be trade. There would be rich foreigners coming into Israel. I mean, that's just, I think, just goes to reason. I'm sure, unless they were just all Trumpers trying to build a wall.
So I think this is sort of what goes to the overall point of the passage, and that is that the land is established as it's established that the land is to have its 7th-year Sabbath every 7 Sabbaths. In 50th year, then there's supposed to be this declaration. This is, by the way, this is not unique to Israel. In fact, Israel's taking it from, I want to be careful how I say that there's a tradition behind this in the ancient Near East that goes back to, I mean, everybody can see it in the laws of Hammurabi, for example. There's this thing called Anduraru, which is it's actually the same root, darur, in the Hebrew, but it's declaring, it's like letting things release, letting things go, letting things flow, I think is another use of the term. But what would happen when a Mesopotamian king would come to power? They would declare freedom throughout the land. And what that meant was people that owed debts, including debt slaves, their debts would be canceled. And this is actually really important to recognize. The reason that scholars, when they define their terms, they do so in a way that's very precise. Debt slaves are slaves whose slavery is contingent upon a debt. Chattel slaves are slaves whose slavery is not contingent upon a debt. So, I mean, that's why they define it that way, because it's giving precision to what's going on here. So, Mesopotamian king comes and declares freedom to everybody. Again, it's to the citizens, and usually it wasn't like countrywide, nationwide, however you want to say that. It was to a particular area, or this particular area, maybe one that was under particular economic stress. But again, it was just to sort of hit a reset button in that area. This is saying it's not just for this tribe or for that tribe, or it's throughout the entirety of the nation. All debts are canceled.
Yeah,
all debts are canceled.
Kind of seems like a decent system if you don't want to have an oligarchy. Like here in America, just every 50 years reset. Sorry, Rothschilds, whatever their name is, but no, you got to start over and do it again. No oligarchy for you. I mean, it sounds not a bad system, not something that I would disagree with. I mean, it seems pretty sound. I mean, if you think about it, for a primitive civilization, that this was a way to kind of balance the power for the people, almost.
But I mean, this is precisely the point. The reason that the passage in later in verses 44 to 46 stands out so sharply is because it's very specifically saying the Jubilee does not apply. That's the whole point. And I mean, you pointed it out in the debate, but what it's saying is very clear. Right? They serve la'olam in the Hebrew. It's into perpetuity. It's not they serve and then ultimately are released. They become, that's what the word achuzah means. So I know I've probably said this before, Knock, I'm really sorry, but the word that's used there that's called proper, that's translated property, it's the word that's used. It's used to describe the land. This is the only place that it's used to describe people. And the point here is that your parcel of land as an Israelite, that doesn't leave your family. Now it can go to your extended family. It can be purchased, but it has to be purchased by a kin of some sort, right? And like I don't know. I'd have to do some research into how far out that could go, but like it doesn't have to be purchased by back by the person that sold it. It can be purchased by a near redeemer, right? A near kinsman, which you see that in the Book of Ruth, for example. Yeah. Where was I going with that? Oh, so but that land is called achuzah. It's the landed property, and you can read it all throughout Leviticus 25. So what that means is that property stays with the family. It doesn't get sold. Like it emphatically does not change. It does not revert. It does not. What I mean by that is there's no point in time where you don't own it anymore. Mm.
So
right? It's always yours.
No banks come in to collect their mortgage.
Right. And so what you could do as an Israelite, if you became very poor, you could sell off a portion of it, right? You could say, all right, Josh, you can, buy this portion of land for me. But the law stipulates that in the year of the Jubilee, I have to give it back to you.
Yeah, so
I have to give it back to you.
It's borrowed land, basically. You're only buying it until this.
That's
year
exactly
of the Jubilee.
right.
So,
and there are calculations that are involved with that, depending on how many years until the Jubilee and all that stuff. But the point is that the landed property is called achuzah. Mm-hmm. So when you get to verse 44, 45, I can't remember which one it's in, and it says they will be your achuzah. What that means is, very specifically, they become something that's in your family and passed down. It's part of your inheritance. Like it's landed property now. Very specifically, it doesn't leave the family, which is why it says you pass them on as inheritance to your children. They serve you la'olam, they serve you for life. Sometimes it's translated forever. It's translated. But I mean, I hate to say it, but pick up a commentary. Like just go pick up evangelical commentary. It doesn't matter.
Well, and that's the thing. Like, and because I didn't use a lot of scholarship in the debate yesterday, and I said it in the debate. I feel like that's more for did the Bible endorse? I'm going to pull from scholars. This is about ethics, but I try to tell almost all scholarship. Yeah, you're going to find some people out there to say a thing, but that's why we have consensus on things, especially when it comes to academia.
I just don't know that you will find a scholar who will say some of these things. So the whole point, and this is not to shill, even though I'd be very happy if people bought the book. It's the reason I wrote it. But there's a section where I talk about Leviticus 24 or 25, 44 to 46. And I just, all I did was quote scholars. So I just said, to be clear, what makes this passage so contentious becomes immediately apparent to the reader. The Israelites were allowed to purchase foreign slaves who were able to be kept for life and passed down as inherited property. Given the highly contentious nature of these verses, and although it might seem a bit unorthodox, I would like to quote a number of ancient Near Eastern and biblical scholars before we analyze the text itself. And I quote just in full, I just quote them, right? One right after the other. And it's for 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6.5 pages of just quotes. And they all say exactly the same thing.
So this is just common knowledge, even for the scholars for the other team, so to speak. I'm the raging atheist. Your own scholarship is telling you this. It's not me telling you this. I'm just relaying the information in a debate.
Yeah, and I mean, again, it's the same thing. People, I think, would be very surprised to learn that I tend to not say things that aren't consensus scholarship. There have been a couple of things that I've put out, and I'm very clear when I put them out. Yeah. Look, this is not consensus. This hasn't been around long enough to be consensus. I think it's an interesting idea, and it's done by a reputable scholar. But it could be right, it could be wrong. But the point is that I tend to not say things that aren't consensus scholarship. And the reason that I do that is because my expertise, what I would feel comfortable saying, this is what this means. And I don't even think that I would say this is what this means. I would say, I feel more comfortable saying this is what this means on my own is what I wrote my dissertation on. Right. So I wrote my dissertation on the Old Babylonian, Sumerian, and literary tablets from Kish. Right. I mean, I would feel more comfortable saying, yeah, I disagree with consensus on this point. And the reason that I feel comfortable with disagreeing with consensus on this point is because I've probably done more work on this topic than all but 6 people in the world, maybe.
I wish I could say that about anything.
But the thing is, it's so narrow. I mean, I wrote that other book on that. That's why I wrote that other book on it. But there are still people that I would defer to. No question, there are people that I would defer to. But when we talk about these things like slavery or Ezekiel 26 or the dating of the book of Daniel or the Pentateuch, who wrote the Pentateuch, I didn't write a dissertation on any of those topics. There are lots of people that have. What I have is the ability to go research the hell out of people and to do so, I think, pretty effectively. Yeah. So when I say things like, yeah, it's been pretty settled that Moses didn't write the Pentateuch for like 150 years. That's not me saying that. That's consensus scholarship saying that. When I say, and this is the thing that's funny about it. People would be surprised, I think, to hear that something like Ezekiel 26 and the prophecy against Tyre, and I had a debate about that recently. That's not something that there's this big fight over whether, whether Ezekiel prophesied that Nebuchadnezzar was going to be the one that took Tyre or not. That's not contentious. Like everybody, yeah, of course, that's what it says. That was his point. And nobody disagrees that Ezekiel 29 is confirming that didn't take place. Like that's not a source of contention in scholarship. Where the disagreement, and people can read, Chris Udd has a great article on this, or Robert Chisholm, but particularly Chris Udd, I think it's in Tyndale Bulletin 2000.
I think I remember quoting Chris Udd quite a few times in my debate.
Yeah. I mean, evangelical scholar, right? Yeah. But he basically goes through and says, look, here are all the sort of older positions, sort of fringe positions that people have taken over the years, but and here's why they don't work. But on the whole, vastly on the whole, the problem is not, the contention is not in whether Ezekiel said that Nebuchadnezzar would do this and then it didn't happen. Yeah, everybody recognizes that. What they say is there a theological rationale behind it? So, is prophecy contingent? So did the king of Tyre repent, or did the Pharaoh repent, and that made God change his mind about that because prophecy is contingent, is the argument. And there are other theological answers that I disagree with, but nonetheless, that's where the tension lies. And really, to a lesser extent, but still, I mean, it's certainly consensus scholarship with the dating of the book of Daniel. So you read somebody like Tremper Longman. Tremper Longman is an evangelical who holds to an early date. But if you read, and I know he's written a more recent commentary, and I haven't seen it, but in his older commentary on Daniel, he has in his introduction or his preface essentially saying the evidence is very much in favor of a late date. But because of theological, what's the word that he uses? Theological commitments that I have, I hold to an early date, and I think that it's tenable. So, I mean, even people that hold to the early date will often say, yeah, I mean, the late date has the evidence on its side.
Yeah, anyway. I believe it was CJ maybe that I debated about Tyre, and I can't remember if it was CJ or not, but
it was, yeah,
yeah, and his argument was, well, it was later, it was Alexander the Great, and it's like, no, and I think it was that contingent argument. Well, of course, this eventually became conquered land by somebody, but no, the author's intent and what it says is important, especially when you're talking about things like prophecy in a city that still stands to this very day.
Yeah. I mean, there's those things aren't really, aren't really up for debate.
Yeah, well, and that's kind of what I thought. That's kind of what I thought, and it is what I knew. And I try to tell him that he didn't throw out a couple names on a couple things. I'm not sure if it was about the Jubilee. I know, like, one time when I did say, no scholarship says this, and he was like, well, William Lane Craig says it all the time, and I'm like, facepalm.
Oh.
Yeah, you're helping yourself here.
Okay, I mean, like, I don't. Yeah.
Yeah. So, but we kind of touched into the next thing, and I do want to thank CJ. He did put in the side chat earlier, and I kind of have it stopped in the right spot on my in my studio so I can read it. What he did quote you, so we can get to that. But before we get to that, we kind of touched on it earlier. This idea that ancient Israel was somehow just observantly different than the rest of the Near East. And I kind of fought back against that in our debate yesterday, to the extent that I could, not knowing the laws of Hammurabi as you do, or the Near East as you do. So I was really hoping like maybe you would speak to that. CJ is in the audience, and CJ's not the only one that makes this argument. And me and you have talked about this before, to where I was granting Christians this for a long time. So I would love to hear you talk about that.
Yeah, so there are two aspects to this, I think. There is what the laws are in places like Exodus and the earlier covenant code, which is less utopian in its features. And then what you see developed in Deuteronomy, and it's more utopian, and then here in Leviticus 25, I think it becomes fairly utopian. But there's so it's more complicated than one's better than the other, or they're exactly the same, right? Neither of those is really the issue, or the way to address that. So to start off, there is guys can read Raymond Westbrook on this, and he's got I always push it, but I think it's a 2003. It's 2001 or 2003. I always mix them up, but it's called Laws in the Ancient Near East or something like that. That's terrible that I can't ever remember the name of it. It's 2 volumes. But he also has, I think it was posthumously published, or right before he died, it was published. I can't remember which one. It's called From the Tigris to the Tiber. And it's all bunch of his older publications all brought together by, I think, Lynch and Wells. Anyway, those are 2 places you can read about this. But he and other scholars, I think, hold to essentially there's this like broad legal tradition that stands in the ancient Near East. So there's a way that people had, there's this legal rationale that people all had, generally had, which is why you see such commonality between the various, law codes, right? The law collections. And again, I'll just recommend this book again. If you want to read these law collections, just go grab Martha Roth's book. But so ideas like what to do with debt slaves, or what to do with contracts, or any of these, what to do when an ox gores somebody, all these things, while they sometimes don't have the specific end result that's exactly the same. For example, one might be 20 shekels, one might be 30 shekels or something. The legal rationale on how to handle the problem is consistent throughout the ancient Near East. And that is true also of the Hebrew Bible. When you look at the laws themselves, how to handle debt slaves, how to handle chattel slaves, the Hebrew Bible is essentially on par. Sometimes it's a little better, but usually it's in its utopian aspects that it's better. Things that didn't actually happen, that weren't actually carried out. Sometimes it's not as good. For example, Laws of Hammurabi, I can't remember which one. I think it's like 115, 116, somewhere around there. Don't quote me on that. It talks about if someone is a debt slave is taken, a distrainee is taken, they're kept for 3 years and then they're released. right? 3 years, then they're released in the fourth. Whereas in the Hebrew Bible, it's 6 years, they're released in the seventh. Not that, I think that's a big deal, but it's like I wouldn't go around saying, oh yeah, the laws of Hammurabi are so much better than the laws of the Old. I think they're all essentially doing the same thing.
And on a moral aspect, 3 years, 7 years, a slave's a slave. You're still owning a person. Yeah, so
that's exactly right. Yeah, and so when there was a book by Daisy Yulin Tsai, and she's not the only one that wrote about it, but it's something like the humanitarian laws in Deuteronomy, something like that. I can't remember the exact title. It's in the JSOT series, I think, Green Book. But what she's doing is she's looking at these sort of utopian laws, and they're only for the Israelites. That's the other thing that's really important to recognize. They're for the treatment of the Israelites. So when you look at Deuteronomy 15 and it talks about, when you set your debt slave free, the text has developed from the covenant code of Exodus 21, and it's saying now when you set them free, not only do you let them go, but you give them all kinds of shit, right?
Yeah.
Give them all kinds of produce and, things from your vineyard and from your flock and blah, blah, blah. You give them lots of stuff so that they don't fall back into poverty. And economically, that's disastrous, right? That doesn't work. It's why they say that it's utopian. And the way that God handles that is he says, I'll take care of it supernaturally, right? I will give you such a blessing. If you obey my laws, I will give you such a blessing that I'll supernaturally provide for these things. So it's not economically, if there were no supernatural aspect to it, it wouldn't work. Again, I'm not an economist, but, and the same holds true in Leviticus 25. So at least that's how the narrative's painting it, is God is going to come in and supernaturally intervene. So if you're strictly looking at the way Israelites are treated in Deuteronomy in particular, but also in Leviticus, yes, I would say that in those laws, there's progression that's been made because it's treating their fellow citizens better, right, than what you see in the wider ancient Near East. But the way that, the general legal mindset and the way that the laws were generally set, particularly in like the covenant code, it's on par.
yeah.
There's really not that much of a difference.
I did somewhat address that in the debate last night too, because I did try to tell CJ, and I brought it home as the point that there must have been opposition within the society against the slavery. And you can correct me if I was wrong about this, but as far as I've understood the history, as you're saying, throughout the generations, the laws did get better in Israel, and they did become a lot more humanitarian as they went along. And didn't they eventually get rid of the slave trade, or was that a result of the displacement of the Jews? I can't remember in history what I read about that.
Yes, we've got to be careful when we talk about this, right? Because again, I know it's frustrating to do this, but we have to be careful if we're talking about the narrative, if we're talking about what actually happened historically. So this development that we see is not necessarily, I don't think, in the actual practice. In other words, I don't think that there's actually this practice that takes place, and they're coming to the realization, these things.
There's not an abolitionist movement.
Reflects that.
Yeah, there's you don't have that abolitionist movement. This is wrong.
Yeah. These are later elite Judean scribes that are writing these things, right? So, what I would say though is that there's a theological motivation behind, particularly what you see in Deuteronomy and Leviticus 25. Now, those texts, I think, again, consensus scholarship would say that Exodus comes first. It's the earliest, Exodus 21, the Covenant Code. And then Deuteronomy 15 comes later, maybe at the end of the 7th century with Josiah. And then, the Holiness Code comes later, maybe the Persian period. But when I say that there's development, what I mean by that is that the later writer has at his disposal the older text. And their articles, there's an article called "The Birth of the Lemma." I think it's by, I always get it mixed up who it's by. It's either by Levinson or if you search "The Birth of the Lemma," you'll see it. But what he's looking at is how Leviticus 25 is turning Exodus 21 on its head. So it has Exodus 21 in mind, and it's saying, okay, we're changing these things, we're turning these things around.
Mm-hmm.
And Deuteronomy 15 does the same thing. So when I talk about development, that's what I mean by that, is later writers who's sort of modifying these things for his own ends, for the theological aim that he has. He's developing those things.
We kind of see that in the New Testament. You know, that's the kind of like the controversy surrounding what is it, Luke, the first book, and then the writers having access to Luke and able to make certain changes to kind of, you know, do their story thing and make things fit. You know?
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, you've got like source Q, and then Mark is pulling from Q, and others pull from Q, and then
it was Mark. Mark was first, right? Yeah, Mark was first.
Yeah.
Right? Yeah.
And then Matthew and Luke are pulling from Mark, and they're also pulling from Q, and then they have their own source they're pulling. I mean, it's all, I mean, there's it's complicated, right? It's complicated.
Yeah, which is what we atheists love, because we poke it complicated.
The thing is, it's so funny to me that I think that so many of the things that we poke at, as you say, we're doing so to get people to leave this really strict fundamentalist view. Right? It's just take a step back. This doesn't have to be your ethical system.
Yeah,
right? You don't have to go back to Leviticus 18 and say, now how should I live my life? Right? That's not what this is. Let's get rid of that.
Yeah, get rid of that rod. You don't have to use the rod.
But what I do want to say is that I thought you made a really good point, and I heard it in your opening. And that is, I know I fed you some sources, but like, I thought you made a really good point when you were talking about how you have to, you can't look at, I know I've said this before or whatever, but I thought you articulated it really well. And that is that you can't look at the laws in the Hebrew Bible and then what was done in the antebellum South, like on the ground amongst the people. You have to compare either passages like Jeremiah 34, Nehemiah 5, some of the stuff that we see in the book of Amos. You have to compare those things where they're not following the law to, them not following the law in the antebellum South. Or you compare the laws in the Hebrew Bible in the wider ancient East and the laws in the antebellum South. And when you do that, it's a little scary. Because as you quoted some people, Thomas Morris has that book. Excellent resource. I should have brought that over here as well.
Yeah, Southern Slavery and the Law.
Yeah, Southern Slavery and the Law. And I mean, it's a thick book, but it's a good read, at least to just read those chapters. So yeah, I mean, I think that was an important point to make there, because you do see in places like, Jeremiah 34, Nehemiah 5, you see that these laws weren't obeyed, right? And whether Jeremiah 34 is actually depicting something that happened in actual reality, or if this is again sort of a stylized. Anyway.
Well, but to the Christian worldview, it's definitely something that did indeed happen, right? So
sure.
And I'm seeing big wrong. I'm not sure what CJ is talking about there. Of course, we're wrong about everything. CJ knows.
Obviously.
I do want to get to what he did say, because like this was a moment in the debate I was like, huh? And then he kept hammering it home. And eventually I'm like, all right, so if Dr. Josh said this, I need to know the context in which he said this, because I might disagree with it. So it was like, so what I said is that in the ancient world, the options when you conquered a city were kill them, leave them, or enslave them. And that enslave them was considered the humane option. And I think he goes on to say something like where he heard you say that. I heard that in both the Dr. Josh versus Dr. Brown debate and his tag team with Dillahunty.
I said that the humane thing to do would be to enslave them?
Yeah, he said, so what I said is that in the ancient world, the options when you conquered a city were kill them, leave them, or enslave them. And that enslave them was considered the humane option. And this caused probably one of my most heated moments. I don't think it's the time when I actually took my headphones off, slammed threw them, and was like, what are you talking about? This was one of the heated moments to where I was like, I'm pretty sure Dr. Josh wouldn't agree that the only option, the only humane option would be to enslave them.
Okay, so let's. So I don't remember saying that. I remember other people saying that I've critiqued. But let me try to steelman the position, or to be fair, because certainly I would have said something. I'm sure he's not.
Yeah, I'm
pulling that
sure
out of
you
thin
said
air.
something and he's misconstruing it, maybe.
So here's again, kind of going back to this point, and maybe this is what it is. So let me see if I can't do this. In that debate with the Knechtleys, Stuart and Cliff, one of the things that kept happening was they had a foot sort of in each interpretive model, right? They had a foot in the historical critical model that they would tap into periodically, and most of the time they had their other foot in the inerrancy of the narrative. Right, the narrative is that's what happened, and when God says to do this is what we do, and so forth. And this really showed up in places like the Canaanites, right? So I hear this all the time. Canaanites are these horrible, wicked. Oh my God, they're just so terrible, and they're just sacrificing babies, these bronze altars, melting and screaming, blah blah blah. Okay.
Yeah, is all that gay.
Please,
sex.
everybody,
yeah.
just everybody go read. Everybody go read Heath Durrell's book, Child Sacrifice in Ancient Israel. Just go read it. And leave me alone.
I've literally talked to Christians, and they pretty much make it out like the Canaanites were nothing but evil. Like they were having sex with their children and their dogs and their sheep, and just they were putting it in every hole that they came across in life.
So this is the problem, right? If we're going with this, so let's take it out of this and take it into something easier to grasp. I think for everybody, not that anybody would have a problem grasping this stuff, but just so it's no less bias, I suppose. If you go to the flood and you're arguing, was God justified in killing everyone on the planet? It depends on who you ask, right? And what I mean by that is, if you're asking like ethical systems today, was that justified? No.
Yeah, no.
Obviously, if you're asking the narrative, right? If you're asking what it is that the authors are trying to represent, then yeah, absolutely. Because what the text says is that everybody's wicked.
Yeah.
And every thought of their heart all day long.
These
everything that
Nephilim
they do.
angels raping women and
But I mean, like Genesis is very specific that it's humanity, right?
Yeah, yes, and I pointed
like
that out to Christians, and they argue with me about it, Dr. Josh. And I'm like, no, it literally says God did not like humanity.
Yeah, I mean, it's so if you read later, like Enochic tradition or something from later Second Temple period, and you read that back into Genesis, well, then yeah, that's what people do. But that's not what's actually going on in Genesis 6. Anyway, but we don't have to get off on that. But the point is that if you're going with the narrative and you're saying, what is it that the author is intending? What is the story that the author is telling? Then yes, of course, God's justified, because the author's not going to write a story where God's not justified in doing it. In fact, that's the whole point of Genesis 6. So if you read through Atrahasis, for example, you read through the Old Babylonian Akkadian flood story that the Gilgamesh epic pulls from, and the Bible pulls from in a very specific way. Enlil is said to be the God that sent the flood, is said to have done an evil thing, an evil thing. So when the Hebrew Bible, when that author writes his version, like is pulling from that and writing a polemic against it, he's very specifically making the counterpoint that while Enlil was this capricious deity that sent the flood because people were just too noisy, because there were too many people, Yahweh sends the flood because he has no other choice. He has no other choice. He has to do it because everybody's so wicked. Yep. It's a justification of the flood. I mean, there's no question about that. So now if we move this into things like Deuteronomy 20, or Deuteronomy as a whole, talking about cherem, the holy war, and annihilating the people. If you're asking the question, could the Israelites have done anything else that would have been like justified? Is it any way that's justified to do anything else? Well, if you're asking the story, no, of course. The thing to do is, if you know, read through everybody. I think you guys were talking about it last night in Deuteronomy 20. If there are two types of cities that you fight against, right? Well, three types. Two in the outskirts, two outside of the Israel proper, and then the cities that are in Israel proper. So if you go up to a city outside of Israel proper, out of the land of Canaan, and you offer it peace, right? You offer it, essentially to be your vassal, and they accept. They open their gates and woohoo, we're all about this. Well, then great, they're your core. Yeah, they're your corvée labor, right? And what that means, I heard you guys debating that. That was part that I caught. So the word mas there in the Hebrew, it can be translated tribute, and sometimes it means that, like a tribute payment. In these contexts, it means like corvée labor. So you guys talked about the Gibeonites, which is why I mentioned Joshua 9 in the side chat, because the Gibeonites were inside of the land of Canaan. They were supposed to be subject to annihilation. They were subject to the ban, the cherem. But they tricked Joshua. Right? They put on these old raggedy clothes and had these raggedy wineskins, and we've come from such a far country. Well, why would they want to picture that they're from a far country?
Yeah.
Because they'd be outside of the land of Israel, and they'd be under Deuteronomy 20, the portion where it talks about if they accept peace, if they accept to become your vassal. Well, Joshua figures this shit out eventually, and they become essentially whatever it is that you want to call this, but they are into forced labor forever, right? Like the people become water drawers and wood cutters and carriers, right? So that they're corvée labor, but I think even stronger than corvée labor there. So anyway, that's what tribute is. That's what mas is there. They're subject to this corvée labor. But that's the best case scenario. So if Solomon wants to build his temple, he could and he gets all these people. They don't have a choice. It's conscripted. They bring them in, right? Here, come in and build this shit. But they're not slaves proper, because they're not like housed by the civil authority. They're not, the palace doesn't keep them. They go back after they do their corvée labor. They go back. But it's forced labor, right? It's what it is. Anyway, but that's best case scenario. Worst case scenario for them is that if they put up a fight, then Israel's supposed to go in and emasculate the city, kill all the males, which is the fighting force. And then the women and the children become their plunder, right? I mean, it's straightforward how this is supposed to work.
Yeah, so it's like, if you're talking to the narrative, right, and God gives you two options, and one is what God orders you to do to the Canaanites, for instance, which is just wipe them out, mass genocide, extinction, basically. And then your other option is what they do to those other cities outside the nations of Canaan, which it would be enslave. And that, giving, God's obviously monstrous morality, yes, enslavement would be the answer. What is more humane in that instance? What CJ wasn't getting is, we as human beings must, clearly we have more options than God.
Yes.
Because we don't have to just kill them or just enslave them. We can do what we do in the modern age today, which is influence policy, create a better environment, be a friend to them even after that initial war period.
And it's God, right? I mean, this is the other aspect. Right. If in fact, and again, you have to step outside of the narrative in a sense here, which if from a hermeneutical standpoint, if that's not good for you, fine. But I mean, you have to then end up sticking to your guns hermeneutically throughout. And this is what Stewart and Cliff weren't doing, in my opinion. Because they would step outside of the hermeneutical course.
When I saw that debate, Dr. Josh, I was like, I found two new people to cover for the rest of my life.
I mean, they're super nice. Like, there's no question. I don't know Cliff real well, but like I know Stewart a little better.
Cliff was the dad, right?
Yeah.
Yeah, he's the mad one. I call him the mad one.
Yeah. But what they were doing is they were sort of stepping in and out. And this is so let's take rape, for example. Let's take Deuteronomy 22, 28, and 29.
Mm-hmm.
So you have a guy that comes in and, rapes this unbetrothed virgin, someone who is not committed to another man, right? Has not been essentially sold off. That's be careful how I say that, but because in their minds, but anyway, I'll have a chapter on this, by the way, in volume 2 of this book that I'm writing. But that rapist, doesn't go to prison, right? That's what happens is in the narrative's mind, in taking into account cultural norms, taking into account what the text is trying to do from a societal standpoint, the text does what it considers the moral thing. Mm-hmm. It does. I'm trying to. It's doing what it can. There you go. It does what it considers the moral thing to be. That is a really convoluted sentence. Yeah. And that is the rapist is forced to pay for this and to marry the woman if the father, and I can't remember, I haven't read this in Exodus 22 in a while, but in one case, I can't remember if the father has the option in Deuteronomy 22 to say no or not. But in other words, the rapist is held accountable to care for this girl for the rest of her life. That's the idea. That's the option that's given. Now, if you ask, is that moral or is that just? Who are you asking? If you're asking the story, yes, that's from a societal standpoint, given all the other factors, how they consider virginity to be this absolutely priceless thing, then yes, that from the standpoint of the narrative, that's moral. Now, looking at it from the outside, we would say, no, that's rape, right? And that's highly immoral.
Yep.
But I think we have to be clear about what we're asking. So if we're asking, is it more humane? Is it the most humane thing to do to take them into slavery? Well, first of all, that's not what happens, right? I don't know who we're talking about here. Kill them, and you do kill them, right?
Yeah.
That's what you do. You kill the men.
Yeah. And I did point that out.
But if we're asking the question, is it the most humane thing to do to take the women and children as plunder and enslave them? Well, I mean, according to the narrative, yes. I mean, if we step outside of the narrative, assuming some of the things about this deity, the whole powerful nature of the deity, or even if we leave that aside and it's just, this is not the right thing to do outside of the text.
Yeah,
if that makes sense.
Well, we kind of see it play out rarely, but we still see it play out sometimes here in the modern age. Like sometimes a southern state or a southern or a very, very Christian judge, for instance. This has happened a couple times I've read about. They will believe this narrative, so to them this is moral, and then they will force a victim. Or try to force a victim. Like I've literally saw there was a very Christian judge that tried to force a rape victim to give parental rights to her rapist, right? And we as a society we flip out no, that's wrong. That's but to this judge, no. I mean he has made this narrative his worldview, and in his worldview that's perfectly acceptable.
Yeah. I'm looking at the time. I know you get a 9:30 stream. I wanted to make sure, in case there were other things that you wanted to make sure I covered.
And I could, depending on how much time you have, Dr. Josh. I made that stream not quite knowing how much time you had tonight.
Okay.
That other stream will start 10 minutes, 15 minutes after this one ends. But I don't want to rush you out of here. I can do that at any time.
No, I mean, I'm good. If there are other questions that you had, or people in the side chat have, or if I don't know if CJ is still there, but if he's, if you think he's asking questions that you think are worth answering, I don't know. Whatever you want to do.
I've seen a little bit. Let me see. I saw something here that I did want to bring up. All right, so CJ makes this point talking to somebody in the chat, but I think you'd agree that scholarship has grown more secular over time. And I've heard this a lot recently too. Seems to be their excuse not to accept what Christian scholarship is telling them, because even Christian scholarship has somehow been influenced by this secularism. It's not like, oh, we've had more time to study these things, we have more information, archaeology has provided more information. It's none of that. It's secularism and it's the devil. And I just want to ask you, like, is
Sure.
that a thing? Like, should Christians be rejecting their own scholarship based on this quote unquote secularism?
I mean, I suppose they
question.
could do what they want.
The hard questions here.
So let me say a couple of things. First of all, I think probably a third of the Near Eastern Studies department at Hopkins is Christian, right? I'm just going based on what I think.
I was like, most of the
knowing the
professors that they probably complain about being these crazy liberal socialists, like most of the people in America are Christians.
Yeah.
You know?
So, but maybe more to the point. There are two things that I think happened that have, particularly since like the 70s and the 80s, have really made things. There's been quite a paradigm shift, I think, in biblical studies. So, over the past 100 years or 100 plus years, Assyriology has come into its own, right? And I don't think people recognize the effect that has had on biblical studies. So again, being able to go dig up all these law collections, and go, oh my God, like, wait a minute, Mesopotamia, being able to, having found the Rosh Hashanah text, the Ugaritic texts, back in the 30s, 40s, I can't remember. Anyway, so those types of things, being able to see the Baal cycle, for example, or learning about the point of the Canaanites. The point is that there's been quite a development, both historically, linguistically, archaeologically, and that's the other thing that has happened really since the 70s, and that is the archaeology, biblical. I have a chapter in my book that's coming out this summer on the Atheist Handbook to the Old Testament. One of the chapters is archaeology. It's giving an introduction to archaeology, and then the history, sort of a brief history of biblical archaeology, and then some of the test cases. And what has happened? There's a great book called Shifting Sands by Davies.
I think I've
Davis,
actually heard
Davis.
of that somehow, some way. I heard of it.
Yeah, it's an excellent volume. Also, William Dever, 2020 publications, a short book, popular level. It's called "Has Archaeology Buried the Bible?"
Yeah.
And anyway, what has happened is that up until like William Albright and G. Ernest Wright, starting back in the early 19th century and coming through until Wright and Albright, people, the whole point for most people, particularly in the Americas, in America, was archaeology. Biblical archaeology was there to illuminate and verify the historicity of the Bible. So I know I say this a lot, but that whole, like the spade in one hand and the Bible in the other, this is like how they dug. Or where do we dig? What should we be looking for? And what they found, and it really came to a head again in the 70s. It became very, very clear, particularly in the 80s. Like archaeology does not verify the biblical text. It's just like, it takes something like the conquest account, like it falls flat on its face.
Yeah, like I'm thinking something's like brushing my memory. You'd probably be able to correct. This could be wrong, but yeah, like wasn't like the Exodus. It was like a different generation. It wasn't just a different year. Like we're talking like a vast distance of when the Exodus might have actually happened compared to when the text says it does.
So and again, this is all. if people are interested, shoot me an email, digitalhammurabi@gmail.com, and I'll get you, resources on this stuff. But like the Exodus, originally this mid 15th century, like at 1447, conquest of the land 1407, it's not the case, right? It's just not the case. This is not a 15th century thing. And like there are all kinds of ways that we know that, but not the least of which is the Amarna letters. But so then it seemed like it fit a little bit better right around 1200, like the end of the 13th century. Maybe that's when it happened. And so, but it doesn't work there either archaeologically. Excavated, the only city that it really works in is Hatzor. And there's this great quote by Bill Deaver, and he says, 1 out of 38 cities fits. 1 out of 38. And that's not very good.
That's not very good.
So like Jericho, just like anyway, the point is, it became very clear to archaeologists that we're going about this the wrong way. And so in the 80s, particularly 80s and 90s, and up certainly up to the present, like it shifted to like Palestinian archaeology. Then it went to archaeology of the Southern Levant. Now it can be just archaeology of Israel. There are lots of different names for biblical archaeology, but the point is that it's separating itself, excavating in Israel, in Palestine, is distancing itself from the Bible. And the reason for that is it's not that the Bible is not useful anymore, because it is. There's no question that it is, particularly as you get later. But it's useful for different things, aspects of cultural memory, about ethnicity, those sorts of things. Anyway,
and don't so they? One of the things I love best about y'all's channel, Digital Hammurabi, the occasional times when I have caught you will bring on an archaeologist or somebody that's been in the field, and you will talk to that person and talk about their work. And one thing that I don't think a lot of people realize, and maybe you could speak, like sometimes it can be dangerous. Like not only are you, as you say, archaeology just disproves a lot of these religious texts. So you're going into cultures and you're kind of, hey, this is what really happened compared to culturally what you think happened. But also, like, I remember when the war in Syria, because I was this big Aleppo, Free the Children of Aleppo guy. And when that war broke out, I remember they had to shut down archaeology in Syria, and the archaeologists had to pretty much flee for their lives from that country. So this can be sometimes like very dangerous work, as well as, very important academic work that can give us an accurate view of what was going on back then. At least something it can give us.
I was very fortunate to be able to excavate in Syria, and I excavated in 2009. It was the last year before the Civil War broke out.
Oh, so you were there in that time period. Wow.
Yeah, we walked around Aleppo once a week, 1 day a week.
Wow.
We were allowed to go
That's
to
crazy.
Aleppo. We're an hour and a half. We're an hour and a half east of Aleppo in a site called Mara. And I was in Damascus twice. And we visited all kinds of sites in the region. But the point is, Aleppo was beautiful. I loved it. I loved every second of walking around in Aleppo.
It's pretty much gone now.
Yeah, it's really, really sad what's happened.
Yeah.
But one of the things that, and I'm no archaeologist. Like I've excavated with a brilliant team. I took 4 or 5 years of archaeology with some of the best in the field. Glenn Schwartz taught me Mesopotamian archaeology.
No, wow.
I studied with Barry Gitlin for a semester. He came and it was like a special instructor at Hopkins, studied biblical archaeology with him for a semester. But I'm not an archaeologist. There are people that, again, they specialize in this. They are archaeologists. But I do feel comfortable talking about it because I've done it, but certainly not to the extent that actual archaeologists have. So, but you're absolutely right.
You've done it more than me.
But I mean, one of the things that, again, that we recognize now, that people recognize now, is if you go, like go to the Oriental Institute. They have a YouTube channel, Oriental Institute, and just like listen to like Gilboa has a lecture that she did maybe 6 months ago talking about the formation of Israel and origins of Israel and this sort of thing. And I mean, it's just like, anyway, it's a very different field now. So like one of the parts of the archaeology chapter is on the Philistines. And I heard through the grapevine that, Inspiring Philosophy had a video come out on the Philistines today, and I don't know what it's about, but I mean, I imagine it has something to do with biblical text. But like the Genesis, the way that Genesis portrays the Philistines does not match historical reality. It just doesn't. Right? The Philistines weren't in the land during the period that they purported to be there. Right? So if we think about the patriarchal period as any time back in like the old Babylonian period or early second millennium or late third millennium, which I don't think this is speaking to historical reality, but the Philistines are there and they're there in force, right? We know when the Philistines got there, like we know when they came. So, and it's not until like right around 1200 with the Sea Peoples. And it's a little more complicated than that, but anyway, the point is that they've moved away from utilizing biblical archaeology to prove the Bible, or to illuminate the Bible, and now biblical archaeology is to illuminate what happened in the history of Palestine,
the truth, and to derive as much truth as you can, and yeah, I find it admirable. I grew up in I was born in 1977. I grew up in the 80s and 90s. I was a fan of Indiana Jones. Archaeology was what I wanted. That was my big dream until I, found writing and I wanted to be a writer. And still to this day, Indiana Jones, like, he's one of my heroes. He got me my first strike here on YouTube because I showed Indiana Jones punching a Nazi over and over again. That's pretty much the whole video, just punching a Nazi.
Oh, that's funny.
But so thank you so much, Dr. Josh, for coming.
Yeah, sure.
Always illuminating. I do want to ask, because me and John, and I'm going to be talking this more in the next stream that I do, we are going to be starting a new channel. And I would love for you to be one of the first guests. And this is going to be a month or two down the road before we even start this thing. But I would love for you to be one of the first guests and actually come and bring your slavery presentation. Do your thing, and I would love to have you on the channel for that.
I'd be honored. That's great.
Awesome. Thank you so much. Thank you, chat. We are going to get out of here. I know Dr. Josh, like me, is a father and probably has to get to his life. Thank you, Dr. Josh, for coming. Always a pleasure to talk to you, man. I love it.
I will be on Lisa for Truth's channel on Sunday.
I should let you plug. Yeah, plug whatever you need to plug.
I don't remember what time it will be.
She did say it earlier in the chat, but
okay.
That was a while back,
Yeah.
and I'm not sure.
And I think we're talking about slavery. I'm not sure. Megan mentioned that she wanted me to come on, so I'm looking forward to that. It's going to be a lot of fun. So definitely check that out. If you can join the live chat, I'm sure she'd appreciate it. So.
Oh yeah, I'll no football anymore, so I'll be there.
That's true, right? Right.
Nothing to do on Sundays anymore. I'm not going to church. So yeah, and does anything coming up on your channel? Any?
Yes,
big
actually. So Megan is doing a raffle right now to raise.
See that, yeah.
So for anybody that doesn't know, Megan has a nonprofit called Humans Against Poor Scholarship, HAPS, and for the past 2 years, she's raised money, totally crowdfunded, to give PhD students $2,000 scholarships for over the summer. In the first year and the second year that we did it, she was able to organize for 3 scholarships to be given, so $6,000 total each year. So we have enough money right now to give 3 scholarships, and she decided that she really wanted to try to get a 4th.
That's awesome.
So this print that's behind me, this is the actual painting. Like, this is the real painting by Christina Blackfeather. but she made 2 prints of it. One she kept for herself. She gave us the original.
That's crazy.
It's awesome. And
Yeah.
the other print she sent to us, and it's over here in the corner, wrapped up real nice and neat in a package. And she said, I want you to, raffle it off to raise money for the scholarship. So there are other prizes that Megan's come up with. There's like, I know I don't call it merch. I call it Chandice.
Yeah. Your coffee cups
but,
are exquisite. I really want to get a coffee cup. So
I know she's got coffee cups, she's got prints, she's got a whole bunch of other stuff. But there's a video up on her channel. I think it's the trailer or whatever now. If you go in there, you'll see it. But she just uploaded it today. But we've raised, and I think she's actually walking in here right now.
$1,370.
We have raised $1,370 already
wow.
in the past 3 days, she said. So we're trying to hit 2,000. I got to tell you, like if it keeps on and we get to 4,000, we'll be able to do 2 extra scholarships. So, anyway, but you can win all that stuff. But go to our channel, and I think all the links are in the video description. So yeah, that would be really useful. And again, it's for a phenomenal cause. And if you donate, you get to help vote. You get to vote for who you think should get the scholarship. So.
Yeah, I remember it last year, and I remember watching a few. I didn't end up seeing who won, but I remember watching. You bring in a few of the candidates on, and they're talking about their work, and I was like, "Man, this is exceptional. Like, it is exceptional what the two of you are doing. Not only promoting good scholarship, promoting good academia, but putting your work and your money where your mouth is as well, and supporting these young folk as they're going through like a rough time in their life. Like politically we had this conversation about college tuition. These people are going for PhDs, extra college on top of that. So I commend both you and Megan. The work that you guys do is phenomenal, and you deserve all the growth and the positivity that your channel seems to be experiencing.
Well, I appreciate that. We just last thing I'll say is there are very few African Americans in our field, and I think again, I'm not like a specialist in any of this stuff, but I think it's pretty apparent there's a problem. And so we decided that we wanted to start another branch of Humans Against Poor Scholarship, and I don't remember what she's calling it now. I think it's Black Students Matter. It's Black Scholars Matter, Black Students Matter. I think it's Black Students Matter. But anyway, what we are doing is we're partnering. We partnered with. So there are annual conferences that scholars go to, and in our field there are like 2 or 3 big ones that you usually go to 2 of them, sometimes more. But it costs money, right? They're all over the country each year. They're in different places. You got to travel there, so the plane ticket, then you've got to get the hotel room, then you got to pay for food, and they're so important to do because everybody's giving papers, all the latest research that they're doing. But the biggest thing is networking. You get to see all the people in the field, and hey, you're doing this, and maybe I can get in on that or whatever. And when it comes time to hire people, if you know the people that are going to be on the hiring committee, that really helps. Anyway. But it's also one of the hardest things to do, I think, because it's like going to meet the president or something, because these are giants in the field that you get really intimidated, and you don't want to go talk to them because you feel like an idiot because you don't know anything yet because you're just a little lowly PhD student.
You fanboy like I did with Godless Engineer.
That's right. So what we're doing is we are going to pay, starting off for one, we're hoping to be able to pay for one African-American senior, somebody who's applying to or has applied to, I can't remember what she's doing specifically, but it's like a brand new PhD student. And we're paying their plane ticket, we're paying their cost to register for that particular
conference.
I can't think of it. Conference, yeah. And then the hotel and giving them some money for some food. And we're setting up, we're coordinating with either a senior student, PhD student, or a scholar to meet them, to take them around, to introduce them to all these senior scholars, to get them networked.
Yeah, that's awesome. That's
with the
great.
idea that this will give them this leg up. That I don't think, I think that, I mean, I think we all would agree. I hope we would all agree that it's difficult for certain people to get into that position. So
yeah, definitely.
We don't know if we're going to raise enough money for that. We have committed to paying for the first one ourselves because we think it's important. So if we don't raise enough money, yeah, I'm excited. I'm excited for what she's doing. So.
Oh yeah. I think it's awesome. I I did get a $3 donation there, and I'm gonna actually read it. J-Dubs, debate me on Judaism? No, won't be. Won't be debating you. Won't be doing anything with you. So thank you so much, Dr. Josh. What you and Megan are doing is awesome. What you and Megan do in this community is awesome. And you know, I love both of you to death. I think you're both just wonderful people, and I just feel I feel grateful to have a relationship with both of you, especially when you're doing such great work.
I appreciate that.
Thank you so much, Dr. Josh.
Absolutely, my pleasure.
All right, guys, I do have another stream coming up. It's going to be 15 to 20 minutes after this one ends. Give me some time to go do what I need to do. I will be back, so join me for that. Yeah, it's an important announcement. I'm sure it's going to make some of you mad, but we will get through it. So thank you, Dr. Josh. Thank you, everybody, for being here.
Thank you.
And thank you, patrons. Always be the conversation. And CJ, sorry I got so hot yesterday, but I'm glad that Dr. Josh came in here and verified everything I told you. So we'll see you guys soon. All right, just a couple seconds of music, Dr. Josh.
This was good.